perfect.
So after 20 years, what have you seen that actually transitioned or changed in your eyes that makes you, like, say, most happy, and what hasn't changed, or in a disappointing way that's...
Well, I think transition has been a really fascinating self-organizing experiment. So if somebody starts doing transition in, I don't know, Sao Paulo in Brazil, it's not like they have to do it like this, you know. It's like it's not like Greenpeace where they'll say, here's your campaign for February, do this campaign.
There's no SOP.
It's like that has a thing, but it's more like it's driven by the interest and the passions and the commitment of the people who are in that particular place. So, and as an experiment in self-organization, it's been amazing. And my role for years in Transition Network was to scan that movement for interesting stories and then to share those stories, whether in books or blogs or videos, films, whatever.
It's nice.
It was a really lovely job.
People in energy and stories.
Yeah, and actually, and there's something really lovely when people associate me with being kind of one of the reasons why they started doing it. For them to be able to share the story of the thing they created inspired by that is often quite meaningful to people. So so there's many, you know, we could do a sort of 24-hour podcast of me just telling stories of exciting things that have emerged from transition. I think the reality is also that in the years since we started doing transition, in those very nearly 20 years, humanity has released like 30% of all the CO2 it has ever released during that time, and that is still increasing. There are some countries like China actually where that has now started to go into a decline mode, which is really important. But globally, that's still not the case.
Past the tipping point.
We're not past the tipping point yet, you know, and certainly we're not past the tipping point in terms of consumption. We're certainly passing some other tipping points. Particularly in terms of climate. So in terms of the dream that we had that this would be the thing that would catalyse change at scale needed, we haven't been as successful as we would have wanted to. But then I also think it's really important that we don't beat ourselves up about that, because we're like small citizen-led grassroots movements, and oil and gas companies have spent billions and billions of dollars to kind of counteract that stuff and to shift narratives away from that. So I feel immensely proud of what the transition movement has achieved in that time, with virtually no resources at all.
No government support.
No government support, but actually in the moments when it has had government support, when those groups get meaningful support, you get a taste of what this could actually be like. If governments actually funded community groups properly to do really ambitious stuff, they can move so much faster and so much more ambitiously than governments can. You know, so it's like there's always that quote about, in times of crisis, what matters is the ideas that are on the table. And for me, the thing with transition is it's one of the ideas on the table. It's one of the tools now in the toolbox of when people are thinking, what are we going to do? There was a lovely story a while ago. Earlier this year, there was a time in Portugal and Spain. They had a big power cut. Remember, for about 3 days, just all the power went out across the south of France, Portugal and Spain.
Wow.
And it was to do with a grid overload, but they had no power for 2 or 3 days. And I read this blog that somebody wrote, or something. It was on LinkedIn, a post on LinkedIn, where somebody said, you know, the first 2 or 3 hours, nobody really knew what was going on, and it was all a bit strange. And you know, then we all went outside into the street, and people took food and drinks and musical instruments, and actually we all sort of connected outside. It was really lovely. They said it was like being in a Rob Hopkins book. I was like, oh, that's nice.
Wow.
It's like there's a word for it, you know. It's like we have loads of words for the dystopian stuff. Oh, you know, it was like in I don't know, it was like in June, or it was like, you know, we have all these, like, it was like in The Day After Tomorrow, or all these apocalypse. We don't really have that language for like when things actually go well and people come together. So I quite like that people said, oh, it's like in a Rob Hopkins book, you know. That I think transition is there's a huge amount now of, you know, what's called inner transition, all those tools for how we work together, all those tools are there, all those practices are there, the same in terms of transition, all the stories of what can work. and people are still doing loads and loads of things, but in terms of when there's a sort of a big upshift in people going, shit, right, we need to get on with it. Transition is absolutely one of the tools in the toolbox for that.
Yeah, that was what I was coming to, the inner transition part, because I was remembering this when you were teaching us 12 years ago, is this is the part that I see a lot of countries are not doing, although they're doing the outer transition part.
Yeah.
But the inner is actually the source, or the ultimate outcome we want to have. So can you talk more about what inner transition means for you and how that affects the outer and vice versa?
Yeah, so when we started doing transition here in Totnes, it was me and another guy, Naresh. It was two men who had the original impulse. And
what was the name of the other guy?
It was called Naresh Jangrande.
Oh.
And
where is he from?
He's American, I think.
Okay, a different name than
the original. Yeah.
Sounds like Indian.
Yeah, I think he was very into sort of Indian spirituality, and changed his name. I think his original name was George, actually, but he's called himself Naresh. And very lovely. And so together it was the two of us who started this thing. It was very much about doing things. We need to do things. We need to get out there
masculine
and do things. So, sort of masculine, sort of. I didn't think of it like that at the time, but it was a doing kind of energy, you know. And there were two amazing women called Sophie Banks and Hilary Prentice who lived here. And quite early on, they came to see us and said, "This is only going to work and have a life, have a longevity to it, if it makes space for the inner as well. This isn't just an outer process. You need to make space for the inner." They had come from a background in eco-psychology, Joanna Macy work, kind of eco-feminists sort of stuff. And we were like, great, fantastic. And so they started a group that was called the Heart and Soul Group originally. And they started to explore these tools around inner transition. And it's really that idea that, I remember we had an early core group meeting after about 6 months of transition time on this. Everyone was working really hard on it. And Sophie said, we did this go round. So Sophie introduced all those practices like open with a check-in, you do go rounds, you do checkouts, all that stuff which we'd never really done. Just building that culture,
sharing our feelings,
that it's like actually it matters that we meet not just as colleagues with an agenda, but as people who care about each other. You know. And we had this meeting where Sophie said, we went round and she said, if you carried on working at the pace you're working at now, how long could you sustain that? People would say, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. And how long do we want Transition Town Totnes to last? 15 years, 20 years? Okay, so then something needs to change somewhere. We're just going to burn ourselves out. Our movements are full of people who are burnt out. We've lost so many great, amazing people from these movements who just get burnt out. And so that's really like over time in the transition has developed as this sort of set of practices and tools, which I think is one of the reasons why the transition movement still exists after 20 years. Because a lot of the things that were around at the time, Occupy, things that were like, just went like a souffle, they came up and then they went down again. And, transition, because it has paid attention to that and that how we do matters as much, if not more than what we do, and that we pay attention to process and how we make decisions and how we work together and all that sort of stuff. Creating that good culture from the beginning is really, really, really a vital part of this, I think.
Yeah, I so resonate with this part because I've been doing check-ins with my team member for the last 8 years. I always start the weekly team meeting with how we're feeling, what's happening in our life, and it takes several rounds for people to actually say what they're feeling. They're always focusing on work.
Fine.
They're always talking about work. And I'm like, no, what are you feeling? Like what happened in your life, in your heart? And then after a while of sharing this, we wanted to scale our business. And then we hired all these business strategists, executives, and they were like, you need to cut out this bullshit because you can't spend time talking about emotions before you talk about work. Let's just get down to work, get down to business. And then since then, my business has been just going down because it's not fitting who I am. And then it's not what
I'll tell you a little story about that. One of the projects that I was involved in for years here in Totnes was that we started a brewery. It was called New Lion Brewery. That was like a community brewery and a venue, a bar place. We did a big crowdfunder. It was like a member-owned brewery, and we had 2 people who were part of the group, the management group of this brewery, who ran a pub in Totnes. They were a couple, and they were quite kind of argumentative, and they were quite not necessarily that easy to work with sometimes. And one day we had a meeting where somebody had turned off the freezer in the pub, because they did food as well, right? So they had this freezer with like £500 worth of frozen food in it. Someone had turned off this freezer and all the food had gone off and they had to throw it all away. And they both thought the other person had done this, you know. And they clearly had a massive row on the way to this meeting and had arrived in this meeting both like, you know, and actually this rotten food dominated this whole meeting, because we didn't do check-ins at that point. Like as if it was just piled up in the middle of the table, all horrible and smelly, and we were trying to have a meeting around this rotten food because it just kept coming back into the meeting all the time. Whereas if we had had check-ins, they could have said, "I'm really angry because I think we're okay, good. Well, now we park that. We make space to hear that, and then we move on. How are you? How are you? I'm really angry. I'm really angry too. Good. Okay. Now we're okay." But instead, we just had a meeting dominated by rotten food. And after that meeting, I said, we need to start our meetings with check-ins. And we did. And then that became part of the culture from that point onwards,
Wow. Yeah. Like, that's the feminine wisdom, how I call it feminine leadership. Like, the feminine is like taking care of the heart, the intuition, the feeling. Versus masculine takes care of the doing and the logical mind, the rational.
I think it's very much through Transition Town, actually. Through Transition Town Totnes and Transition Network, it's been always a kind of majority of women involved in that. It's been a very sort of feminine organisation in a sense, you know, with a very strong culture around that. And other projects I've been involved with, like the Atmos project, you know, that's trying to develop the site by the train station. Amazing group of women. It's been kind of such a privilege to work, like it's such a different way of working. Not that I don't consider myself to be like a sort of super kind of male in the way that I work. You know, I always try to be very kind of inclusive and bringing people in and holistic, but it's still very much a society that sort of pushes the men to the front, you know, and actually for me one of the big stories of what's happened here has really been the incredible women who've sort of driven a lot of those projects forward, often very much kind of in the background, but amazing.
So the inner transition work that you do is very much my field right now, because I'm also working on the psychological personal development, taking care of emotions of people. But I realized that, well, at least in China now, most people who work in the spiritual realm, or where I live in Bali even, you know, there's a big group of spiritual people, or hippies, or whatever, healers, whatever, self-claimed gurus, all that kind of people. But very few of them actually care about nature or social justice, or not to mention transition. And then there are a lot of other people that I hang out with who are all about ecology, permaculture, and then in Bali as well, like in all environments I've seen, there's a huge gap between them. They don't seem to understand how one can help the other. Like, why should we care about all this emotional stuff when all we want is to build good buildings? Or and then the spiritual people, they are a little bit too much here, and not grounded enough. So they don't understand how the land and the substance and the material world affects our emotional well-being. So there's not much overlapping between the two. How would you say? Because a lot of my people, they definitely are more in the spiritual or personal development world. How would you explain
I kind of think this, it's one of the things that for me is always really interesting about this town, is, you know, although it's always called the hippie capital of Britain, or has this reputation as being this terribly hippie town, it's also, for me, there are some amazing people here doing very practical things. And
like Schumacher.
Like Schumacher, like transition, like lots of different things that are happening here. but you know, people come from all kinds of different perspectives, kind of spiritual wise. You know, last weekend we went to a festival
Yeah,
called Greenbelt, which I was like, okay, it's like 20,000 people, big sort of Christian festival. I was like, I mean, I'm not Christian, and I have a lot of, you know, having grown up in a Christian culture, which I very much rejected in my teenage years, I sort of had a bit of resistance about it. But actually, you know, it was amazing. Like in terms of people with a faith and with a spiritual background. And I living in Tottenham, you go to lots of things where it's like, you know, people who are kind of very spiritual but sort of imagine that they're making a difference in the world but really aren't really. And going to this Christian festival, and I think it's very much like the Christian Freaks festival. It's like, it's not mainstream Christianity. It's like the people who consider themselves a little bit on the outside. But in terms of its inclusivity of LGBTQ plus people, of trans people, of disabled people, its focus on Gaza, on really practical, really like engaged faith, you know. So within Christianity, you have this very strong like socially engaged tradition, you know, like the like the Pope with the Laudate Si that he did, that's incredible, like very critical of capitalism and talking about climate and stuff. You know, within Buddhism, you have a smaller thing, this kind of socially engaged Buddhism, but it's very much there. What I see at the moment, actually, in a lot of more, what might we call them, people like sort of conscious kind of new agey sort of communities, actually, is that people are being drawn actually more in a sort of towards kind of conspiracy theory bullshit nonsense.
There's a lot of this involved.
A lot of this, it's really toxic. And I think that actually someone very clever in like Russian intelligence 20 years ago figured out that there was the demographic. You really see it here in Totnes. People who are very sort of nice people, quite new agey, quite spiritual, who start sharing like fascist material on Facebook. Like, what are you doing? And that a lot of that came from COVID. People were really radicalized during COVID with like pseudoscience bullshit in a way that was really troubling. So it's like there's kind of socially engaged but really going off in the wrong direction. So for me,
fear mongering
and I think it builds on that thing of like, well, you know, if you can't trust official narratives about health and food, what can you trust? And so there's lots of websites that really weaponize that in a way that I think is really dangerous. So for me, my
power away. Like
exactly. You can't do anything, but share this. And that link with what people call conspirituality is really dangerous and really toxic, I think. So where I always come from it is, it's like the starting point is we are in a climate and ecological emergency. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? And it's like that for me. You know, it was a frustration that I had with Buddhism when I was 21 and I was living in Tuscany in this beautiful place. And, you know, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you know, you talk about, you know, seeing the world as a pure realm and all this kind of stuff. And yet we were throwing out so much plastic and all the food was coming from the supermarket. And I don't see why the kind of people you're talking about can't see taking a really active role in tackling the climate emergency as being part of a spiritual practice. For me, it's a spiritual practice.
Exactly.
It's like in Tibetan Buddhism we talk about bodhicitta, and there's like a bodhisattva practice, which is where your spiritual practice is that you work for the liberation of everybody. You work for all sentient beings. That's your practice. And that's so everything that I do in transition, I see as being that. It's like a service at a time when we need to be of service. And sometimes I get a sense that some of that kind of more new age spirituality lacks that kind of bodhicitta motivation.
Exactly.
Why am I doing this? I'm doing it for myself so I can become conscious and evolved. It's like, okay, what about everybody else? You know, and in Tibetan Buddhism, it's that thing of there's no point me just becoming enlightened and swanning off, and I'll leave everybody behind.
Yeah.
So in
The
Tibetan
separation
Buddhism,
between self and the rest of the world.
yeah,
That's
it's like I'm not going to get enlightened, or if I do it, then I come back.
Mm.
So that's why, you know, you have this tradition about you keep coming back to try and get everybody else. You don't walk out of a house that's on fire and go, see you later. you go back in. You get as many people out of it as you can. You know, we're in a climate and ecological emergency. You know, there's people say, you know, no business on the dead planet. It's like, you know, no ayahuasca retreats on the dead planet. No nice expensive retreats where you go and do yoga in nice places on the dead planet. You know, this is serious shit we're in now, right?
Yeah.
We're like we are on target for breaching 3 degrees. Staying under 2 degrees looks like an outlier possibility now. 3-4 degrees. We pass 2 degrees, half the world's grain baskets collapse. We haven't even got to 1.5 degrees yet. And we are seeing impacts. This is the driest summer we've ever had in this country.
Yeah.
It's been horrendous.
Yes.
You know, we're like across France, across Southern Europe, we're seeing fires and everything.
Yes.
It's like
Indonesia too.
yeah, it's
all
like
over.
everywhere around the world. It's like the hottest summer they've ever had. Sweden, Norway, all up there. It's
Yeah.
like 8-10 degrees hotter than it should be there now. Yeah. That's not magically going to go away because we go off and do nice retreats.
Yes.
You know, actually, that is
There's a kind of numbing.
There's a kind of it's like a kind of an avoidance thing.
Yes.
It's like, come on, we need you here. Like, you know, we've been working on this stuff for 20 years, 30 years, working really, really hard on this. And, you know, I don't fly. I stopped flying in 2006. I saw Al Gore's A Inconvenient Truth. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to change something. I think that's what I'm going to do. I haven't flown since. I only travel to the places I can reach by train from here. If I can't get on the train, I don't go. If I get asked to a conference, America or Australia, I do a pre-recorded video. I explain at the beginning how much carbon it would have taken for me to get there, and then that's it. You know, it's like what I always say to people is, don't be a bystander. We can't do that anymore. Everybody needs to play an active role in this. Otherwise, well, like, what's the point of a faith position, whether it's spiritual or more conventional faith position, if you just sat and watched the world go up in flames? Like, it's either of service to doing something about that, or it's a distraction, or at worst it's making it worse. You know, what's the point? Like, you know, there's some amazing retreat happening in wherever it is, and everyone flies to go and do that. You're part of the problem. It's making things worse. You know, actually what happens is we need people wherever they are to be mobilizing, organizing, whether you use the tools from transition, from, you know, wherever people are. If you work in business, you have I think now a moral responsibility within that business to do everything you can to change the direction of that business. You know, using donut economics is a beautiful tool for saying, okay, let's look at what we're doing here. We can't push out into the planetary boundaries anymore. We need to stay within those boundaries. We can't make the world a worse place. We also can't drive. We also need to support the kind of social foundation to make sure that we're pulling everybody out of this situation. What's so liberating for me is when I've done workshops about donut economics with people in business, is that when you define that sweet spot that we need to operate in, people are so much more imaginative than if they just assume we're just going to carry on doing like we always have done.
Because it would not work.
Because it's not going to work.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of, like, actually in China, especially the last 2 years, since we reopened after COVID, we've seen a huge decline economically. It's felt in everyone, including me and all my clients, even the richest tier. And I see this is not just like the failure of, I wouldn't be able to say this, but a system. Also, like, it's like the mindset, like how we've been treating ourselves and how we've been treating nature. It's something there that needs to change, rather than more new business models, how to make more money. I mean,
that is the point. Is that the fundamental model is broken. Whether you're in the West, whether you're in China, wherever you are, we we can't keep doing what we're doing. Like the world is on its knees, the ecosystem is on its knees. We are passing tipping point after tipping point that you can't go back. You can't go back from. You know, the point is, you know, when you're working with people who are high net worth individuals, whether they're in China or whether they're here, largely those are the people who are driving the problem. It's like the wealthiest people, it's like the poor families living in rural China are not responsible for climate change.
No.
People in India, farmers in India, are not the people driving. People living in Plymouth here are living in council houses they are not the people who are driving this problem. The wealthiest 1% are responsible for like 50-60% of emissions, because they have this expectation of lifestyle where they fly here, they fly there, they buy this, they buy that, they have houses all over the place. It's like, if you are fortunate enough to be in a position where you could live like that and you have those kind of resources at your disposal, if you were somebody who lived in the 1860s, in the last days of the slave trade in this country, and you were a wealthy person, and you had made your money from living in a way that benefited from the slave trade, you had money invested in slaves, how would you want history to remember you? Would you want to be remembered as the person who just said, oh yeah, you know, or actually do you want to be on the right side of history? And do you want to use the fact that you had resources, you could have made things happen, you could have been remembered as somebody who was part of transforming that? Or do you want to be remembered as somebody who just went along with the status quo because they made lots of money out of it? You know, it's like being on the right. This is a moment again where it's like, which side of history you're on is really, really fundamentally important. Because this summer has been the hottest summer across Europe, many parts of the world. We will look back on this as having been the coolest summer this century. It's not going to get any cooler, it's going to get hotter and hotter. And the generations that come after will say, and what did you do? There was that 10 years when we could have done something about it. What did you do? You know, and you know, you have access into those people and they respect you. It's like, it's not okay. Like this idea, which has been pushed for so long, which is like, you know, build a business, get rich, sell the business, retire at 30, 40, whatever it is. It's like, if you're in a position where you're skillful enough, or quite often lucky enough to be in that position, you have an incredible potential to be profoundly transformative at this time. Like, mobilize, do something, not just give it all away, but become a force of something transformative
that belongs to the future.
Yeah, like all of us will reach a point, right, where we're lying on our deathbed and we look back. You know, I kind of feel like, you know, I've the last 20 something years of my life, I've worked really hard on this stuff, and it's not a path to great riches and fortune. I don't sit on top of a huge fortune of in that sense, but I feel like I've done everything that I could have done.
Do you have no regret?
Yeah, my kids will be able to say, well, you know, he did everything he could have done, even if it didn't work. But it's kind of when you work in that way and you do that, and then you meet people who are sitting on huge amounts of resources. You know, one of the things that really inspires me at the moment is that there are a number of foundations, philanthropic foundations, and that normal foundation model where you have a big endowment and you invest it to make as much interest as possible, often in the things that are actually making the world worse. You invest it in fossil fuels, tobacco, arms, because you get the most interest, and then you give that interest away for people to do good things. There's quite a few foundations now who are saying that model is ridiculous. And actually, this is this little tiny 5-10 year window where we could do something about this. So they're just spending the whole lot down. What's the point of having this endowment in 20 years' time? So we can just sit and look back and go, oh, we should have spent that then, really. You know, so it's like there's the work that we're trying to do in transition, the work community energy movements are trying to do, local food movements are trying to do, that Schumacher has been very skillful at inspiring people to do. Those movements operate with access to very, very little. But we've seen again and again, like when they do get some money, what they can do with it. And yet so much money is just locked up. And you can't get to it. And it'll still be locked up. It's like, you know, well, you can't eat it. What's the point of it? You know? That for me is the thing, that this is a moment in history where you need to be on the right side of it.
Yeah.
And if you have resources to bring to it, there is such a thrilling adventure to be part of.
Yeah.
Like this next 10, 15, 20 years, if we get it right, and if we can unlock the finance, and if we can just get on with it, and we don't wait for permission, and we start building what comes next, could be the most thrilling, exhilarating ride in history. You know, a time that people will tell great stories about and sing great songs about the people who got on with it and did something amazing, rather than saying, they had a nice swimming pool. Oh, it's great, you know, it's really good. They had like 5 holidays a year, and they had a house in Saint-Tropez, you know. Like, really? Is that what we want to be remembered for?
I think this is touching a very important point, because we were talking about what the powerful and wealthy could do. And then, let me just check again, just to make sure this is, yes, it's still